Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this event. It is morning in Seattle, afternoon on the East Coast. We have and afternoon in Chicago as well. We have guests from all over the U.S. So we're happy to be here today and honor the work of women scientists, Romanian American women scientists, with special guest, Dr. Ioana Cozmuța. I am Otilia Baraboy. I am the executive director and co-founder of the American Romanian Cultural Society, an organization that was founded in 2013 with my colleague here, Ileana Marin. Ileana, if you could wave so we can see you, okay. We have many programs. We run a Romanian Film Festival now in its 9th edition, and we also have a Romanian Heritage Language School. And since 2020, we started working together with World Affairs Council, Ethnic Heritage Council, OSPI, which is the Office of Superintendent of Education of Washington State, and Wenatchee Public Schools, on a project that unites four actually, with Romanian different heritage languages: Russian, so Romanian, Russian, Spanish, and Ukrainian lately that was added. So this program is part of the Heritage Language Grant, and we intend to organize other speaker series featuring scientists from the Ukrainian community, Russian-speaking community, and also Spanish-speaking community. So please stay tuned and follow us more. And Michelle, would you like to add something about the grant?
Yes, I guess I could say that it's an extremely important opportunity that we have to receive this funding from our legislature, because it's coming from our state. It means the citizens of our state have decided that it's important to invest in opportunities for students to learn languages of their homeland, of their heritage. And so the fact that we're able to offer this program, to be honest, is partially because of COVID, because it got people thinking outside of the box. It doesn't have to be a class in one school, one building with students just in one location. And so we have been able to attract students from all over the state to participate. This particular program, since it was funded by our state education or by our state legislature, is for students who are in public school districts in Washington state. They can be homeschooled if they are also registered in a district. But of course, ARCS does offer other programs that students from all over the country, I believe, can register for. And so we're very excited because it is not a curriculum that is set in terms of we have to cover these topics or the kinds of things you would normally think about in a traditional foreign language classroom. Like today, we're going to talk about food, and tomorrow about customs, and the next day about clothes. Instead, we are focused on working with the students to develop a portfolio of who they are as a global citizen. It's called the Global Competence Certificate, and that is through the World Affairs Council. And that project actually exists beyond this grant. So if there are students that are interested, we are also trying to expand the concept across the country. So in this particular section, one of the components of the Global Competence Certificate we call Global Learning is based on things like investigating issues and researching topics of interest. And so we want to have interesting people to learn from, and we want to recognize perspectives from different countries, groups, populations, age groups too. I love the conversation at the beginning about space elevators. I've been hearing about those in our Russian Star Talk program for a couple of years. And then also to learn how to communicate ideas effectively. Of course, that ties a lot into the language. And if we're talking about things that are not just topics around the dinner table at home, that's where the students' language will really grow and will be an asset to them throughout their lives, in their professions, as well as in their home life. And then we really want to encourage students to think about how to take action, how to make a difference in the world. And if there was ever a time that we need to take action and make a difference, it is right now. And so this program is actually very well timed for reminding us of the larger picture of how we learn, not just about our globe, but beyond as well. And so we're thrilled to have Ioana to join us today. And mulțumesc frumos.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Now, I would like, Ryan, would you like to introduce yourself and say a few things about the Global Classroom at World Affairs Council and your contribution to this program?
Sure. Thank you, Otilia. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan. I work at the World Affairs in Seattle, and our mission is to really get opportunities for our community members to learn more about the world. And we have 3 different programs. We have community programs where we provide various opportunities to learn about global and local issues from experts in the field and to participate in thoughtful discourse about those particular issues. We also have a global leadership exchange where we connect Americans to professionals from around the world who traditionally come here on U.S. State Department programs. And then I direct the global program, and the Global Classroom Program's main mission is to bring the world into the classroom. So we're in the business of really equipping teachers, students, and school communities with the knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions or attitudes to be global citizens and to really make a difference in our local and global communities. So the World Affairs Council has a lot of different opportunities for you to become engaged in our interconnected and interdependent world. So check out our website for different opportunities. I'd like also to say, Michelle, for the overview of the Global Competence Certificate and the Heritage Language Project that we've been so fortunate to engage in over the past couple of years. One of the lenses by which we're doing this work is also through the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Sustainable Development Goals really provide an opportunity to really look at these kinds of issues. To give you an example, there are 17 goals, and goal number 13 is around climate change and sustainability, of course, which is an issue that's important to all of us, whether we're in Washington State or whether we're across the US or whether we're in Europe or other parts of the world. So it's really through the Sustainable Development Goals that we can better understand how to explore the world and how we can tackle some of these issues that are important to all of us. And you can see through the screen right now, you can see those 17 different goals, which are very interdisciplinary. They overlap and are, of course, are very pertinent to our conversation today. So I thank you for joining us this morning, and I'm really looking forward to the presentation and the discussion.
Thank you, Ryan, so much. And I will continue by introducing Ioana. Before we do so, I would like to do the land acknowledgement, sorry. So I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. It is important to note that this kind of acknowledgement is not a new practice developed by colonial institutions. Land acknowledgement is a traditional custom dating back centuries for many Native communities and nations. For non-Indigenous communities, land acknowledgement is a powerful way of showing respect and honoring the Indigenous peoples of the land on which we work and live. Acknowledgement is a simple way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories and working towards honoring and inviting the truth. So we're very grateful to be able to host this event. Organizations from Seattle with guests from all over the US, and especially our special guest, Dr. Ioana Cozmuța, who is the founder and CEO of G-Space INC, a women-owned B Corporation, and a reflection of Ioana's passions, which are to discover and build opportunities for socioeconomic benefit at the confluence of space and earth, and to mentor and inspire the new generation towards a more prosperous future for humanity. Ioana holds a PhD in applied physics from the University of Groningen, the Netherlands, and she is an alumnus of Caltech and Stanford University. During her career at NASA and in the industry spanning two decades, Ioana has built a legacy on transforming the status quo, opening new avenues for innovation, collaboration, space technology, commercialization, and public-private partnerships. The current fiber optics manufacturing in space has its origin in a paper that she published in 2017. She's also a TEDx future spoiler, and I can drop in the chat a link to one of her speeches for TEDx. So she's a keynote speaker and a lecturer. She has co-authored over 200 scientific articles. That's really impressive. Technical reports and newspaper interviews, webinars, and podcasts. And just to kind of give us a context for her presentation, she sent us a few ideas that I'm going to start by mentioning here, and I will let her do her presentation. So since 1961, when Yuri Gagarin became the first human to fly to and successfully return from space, humanity has made unprecedented leaps in the exploration of space, such as setting foot on the surface of the moon through the Apollo missions and permanently inhabited the International Space Station for the past 2 decades. Dr. Cozmuța will tell us more about humanity's final frontier today, the new technologies that are being developed and that could help prevent or even stop climate change and pollution, as well as the ways in which this last conquest will affect us on our day-to-day, lives. Thank you, Ioana. Dr. Cozmuța, we're honored to have you.
Honor is mine. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you everybody for taking time out of your weekend and your Saturday. I'm sure you could have found more fun things to do. I do hope this is worth it though. And since we went over through this introduction and we talked about sustainable development goals, before I move into the presentation, I wanted to share that the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs actually has a dedicated website on space supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at it, and Ryan mentioned all the 17 SDGs, space and space technology and the thinking that we put through decades in developing, exploring space and thinking about maybe creating sustainable communities on the surface of the moon or in space or maybe on Mars. So all that thinking, the development of the blueprint technologies and so on is now being connected to every single individual SDG. So space technologies can actually, so when you live on the International Space Station, you need to be able to clean and recycle the water. There's a lot of technologies there that have synergy, and there's programs within NASA, and actually not just NASA, but ESA, JAXA, that those are traditional government organizations who are investing in transferring those technologies. And now that technology transfer it's not only happening in the commercial sector, but it's also being taken into connecting it with policies. And I think the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is a really wonderful framework to create that and to fill that gap between what the space community was doing for decades and what the Earth community needed for decades. So I'll let you explore this. I will put it in the chat, and I will then switch to my main presentation. Before I do that, though, I wanted to take a minute here, and I know we're 35 people, so it would be hard to go around and ask everybody. My thought was, if we're a smaller group, then everybody can introduce themselves a little bit and say, hey, what's your stance with respect to space, I guess we have most people here passionate about space in one way or another. So maybe you can put a couple of thoughts in the chat and share with us what do you think is the most valuable contribution to space, or why do you like space, or if you don't like space, why don't you like space? So share with us in the chat. But if you're not shy, raise your hand and take a few seconds and say it out loud. Okay, I'm gonna ask actually Ottilia.
Oh.
I'm gonna put the spotlight on you, Ottilia. What attracts you to space? What do you think is the potential of space?
I don't know much about space, but I was fascinated by your contribution last year to the program when you talked about microgravity and how we can develop new technologies that will prevent pollution on Earth. That would kind of, and also you were very mindful of how new technology are being developed. It seems that there's more thought is poured into it because we won't just go and pollute, space, right? So I'm wondering what you can tell us about this. I'm, concerned about, climate change and pollution and sustainability in relation to these new technologies, that are being developed.
Absolutely. Ari, I see you're here. I wanted to give a shout out to you. Thanks for joining. And Ari is actually his activities are if you want to say a couple of words, because I know you're putting together this series of workshops, so this is a good opportunity to talk about that.
Thanks so much, Ioana. Taking care of the baby right now, so can't be on camera, but always appreciate your work and this organization. And it's been great co-facilitating the Nexus Outer Space Working Group with you, and we've helped to design a new United Nations Association Outer Space Innovation and Advocacy Workshop Series that we just hosted our first one last week, and we'll be having one in April, on April 14th and May 10th, leading up to the Intergenerational Model UN, where we'll design advocacy sessions for not just the United States government, but the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs, supporting outer space for the Sustainable Development Goals. So yeah, it's been really great doing that with you, and happy to invite everyone here to be a part of that. And really continue to use space technologies to support Earth and the future of humanity.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you. Yeah, and so this series from this past week was about space for everybody, and we'll go a little bit over this. How did we get there, and what is the fantastic potential of that? The next one, I think the topic would be on the space economy, which is booming. And then we're going to have space sustainability, and then maybe space for peace. I think these are the kind of topics that we discussed there. And absolutely, I think it is important to create a bridge between technology and society, but not only society, but what I like to call cultural individuality in a global world where everything is connected. I think there is an underlying fear that we need to speak about, and it is not about nationalism or similar concepts. It is about the fact that wherever we're born with, and I'm born in Romania, right? There are beautiful things that belong to that culture. And of course, we don't want those beautiful things that are culturally unique to one region or another, to one nation or another. We don't want those to be lost in the global voice. And I know the industrialization and the economic growth, sometimes they work they develop at such an accelerated pace that we forgot about the humanities, the languages, the things that are human to us and that connect us beyond, beyond technology and money. So I think making that connection through these organizations, I really see a great potential to continue to develop. So I'm gonna put I saw a couple of girls here. I'm gonna put the light on you, but if you don't want to talk, then don't do it. Malaya and Juliana, you have your cameras on. You've been listening quietly. Do you want to have the opportunity to say something here about yourself and what you think about space?
My name is pronounced Malaya, not Malaya.
Okay, my apologies, Malaya.
Well, lately in ELA, we've been learning about space elevators, like people have already explained. And it's just super interesting because we've also been talking about climate change and how this like all contradicting each other. We read this book too by Ben Michelson called Countdown, and it's about this boy who is white and another boy who is of Maasai heritage, and it just brings in like everything you guys have been talking about together, like climate change, space, and just like heritage and whatnot. And I find it very interesting because I love the idea of space exploration, but there's all these problems to it, like climate change, that other stuff.
Okay, I think that's a good point. So you're thinking, why should we go to space and how going to space could help solve those problems? So I'll touch upon that in my presentation, and let's see how I hope to be able to clarify a little bit of at least a little bit of that. So thank you, but thank you for speaking up. Where did
I see Bryson has a question. His hand is up, and there's also questions in the chat if you
so
want.
I asked Juliana, can you wait a second, Bryson? Juliana?
Hello, thank you for being here today. And also, so sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear my washing machine in the background, it's going crazy. But I have always been really interested in space and just the fact that it's like forever expanding, like, and that everybody's, we are stardust in the words of Neil deGrasse Tyson. But I think one of the pressing things that I'm really interested in is how the world is innovating their own global space economies to combat climate change. And so I would be interested to know like some of the new technologies that are coming out of space tech to that specifically focus on climate change. And then also just kind of like what some of the challenges of that is, because I know we're seeing a lot of space tourism and different things like that. So what is that costing us? Is that actually causing more issues for the environment doing things like this? So those are kind of my main questions about that, but I'm so excited to have you here and looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, and keep on multitasking. We women know how to do that, it's a talent we have. So very interesting. Yeah, it looks like we should have a follow-up maybe presentation talking really about technology and climate change. I'll try to maybe touch a little bit upon it today, but that's absolutely a topic in itself. And this is actually an opportunity. I don't know where you are in your career, but if that's what you're passionate about, I'm sure that with the right focus, you can actually go into the depth of it and connect, make more meaningful connections. I think we're at the early beginnings of trying to understand how we can develop that relationship and evolve it better. In terms of okay, so I'll switch to Bryson, and then there was another question in the chat, and then I'll switch to the presentation. Otilia, does it sound good? Okay.
Yeah, I think that the whole in outer space, we reduce pollution because we're not having it trapped in Earth on our atmosphere. But I wonder if taking all those rockets up into outer space, those create a ton of pollution. I wonder if it will ever even out the amount of pollution, we reduce going up there and doing it versus how much carbon those rockets produce just to take the materials up, let alone for other stuff.
And that's an absolutely brilliant question, Bryson. I think we are using currently, or we're reliant on chemical propulsion primarily, but there is a lot of investment and a lot of development into electric propulsion and other means of propulsion, including potentially solar. There's a lot of challenges there in terms of scalability and so on. But what I would say is that is more of a problem going from the surface of the earth into space. Once you're into space, and there's been people, companies such as Deep Space Industries and Planetary Resources who have put a lot of thought into what would through space economy, or what we call the cislunar economy, the cislunar space, the space, if we were to fill the space between Earth and Moon with infrastructure, with like hotels and gas space stations and space stations and factories and so on. Very interesting is that, you know, what we would use for propulsion there is water, and the source for water would come from icy meteorites. And so it becomes a very simple matter of mining those icy meteorites and then using the water for propulsion in the cislunar space, which is pretty, at this point, it sounds like the most sustainable way of moving into space. So I think that's you know, I hope that that answers your question. The other advantage of being into space is usually you have very strong UV radiation, and UV radiation decomposes pretty much any kind of chemical into basic atoms or very, very small molecules. So I think that's another advantage. Having said that, we should absolutely, I'm a very strong proponent of not evolving something, let it become a problem and polluting problem, and then having to solve it, but think about it ahead of time. So I thought that was a very good point that you brought here. Thank you for that. Ottilia, did you want to highlight another question maybe from the chat?
So Ryan has a question, and also Mary Gross has an interesting question.
Sure.
So Mary is wondering, what are the main differences between manufacturing on another planet or moon and manufacturing on a satellite?
So in terms of what you can manufacture, can you let me see, maybe between manufacturing on another planet or moon. Okay, I'll take the question as it is, because I would say that there should be a little bit more clarification on it. But I would say, so let's say you want to manufacture semiconductors, and the difference in manufacturing between, let's say, Earth and Moon would be the fact that you would now have to identify the ore for the materials in a different ways, right? We have some idea of what ores have what composition and what is their distribution at the on the surface of the moon, but we actually do not have the precision that's required, and we don't have that initial analysis on how actually rich the ore is in one element or other that's required. The other thing is sometimes manufacturing on Earth, and you have different gravity levels. And when you manufacture something into a gravitational environment such as Earth, and then you go and you manufacture on the surface of the moon where you have you know, a third of it, or if you go into space where you are pretty much close to zero, or you are in zero, like if you're in an L2 point, similar to where we put the James Webb Telescope. So when you don't have gravity, let's talk about the two extremes. When you don't have gravity, you don't have a lot of sedimentation, convection phenomena. The chemistry even is driven differently because of the solubility effects at the molecular level, right? It's all about the free energy that a system has to explore or not, constrained by the environment in which it operates. So having said that, we developed an entire industry and very complex manufacturing techniques on Earth, but we developed them because our brain is calibrated into a 1G environment, and we had to make the products and the best quality that we could and the yield that we could given this environment. However, if we now remove the gravitational force, we can strip several steps in that manufacturing process, because those are literally specific to manufacturing in a gravity environment or another. So I would say that the two major elements that are related to the process itself is the raw materials and how you get your raw materials, how you sinter them, how you purify them, and then the manufacturing process itself. But also the fact that when you remove the gravitational force, there is a tendency for your materials, for your products, so the semiconductor wafers in this case, or the fiber optics, right, to have the potential to be more uniform and less defects, more defects free. And I think that that is a great potential that we're still trying to grasp and understand and transform. We've actually just run a study on the sustainable impact of manufacturing. So a lot of the manufacturing processes on Earth required clean rooms, which require high vacuum. In space, we do have vacuum, and actually the space, it's like a huge clean room if you want to take it this way. So you wouldn't need to, from a sustainability and a resource consuming perspective, you wouldn't have to artificially create vacuum at the surface of a planet like Earth, right? And that's very energy intensive and very polluting, but you could actually leverage something that's native to space. So it is actually a very important driver for us to seriously considering moving manufacturing off the surface of the Earth into space. The other thing is we use a lot of pristine resources, water, in manufacturing and semiconductor, integrated circuits, and we're all guilty because we all have an integrated circuit on our phone, right? So it's billions of these kind of little tiny chips. Each of them is using about 8,000 gallons of water to manufacture. The smaller we go in scale, the more we need that water. Now, there is, of course, a lot of environmental care that the industry takes, but the water never gets in a pristine state back as it was taken. Plus, you usually increase the temperature of the water at the end of this process. So that's just one example, but you can go on and look into the CO2 release because of different manufacturing techniques and so on. We use a lot of rare earth elements. Rare earth elements in manufacturing, they're used at the molecular level. They're used to improve product performance, right? And but using them in the manufacturing is very toxic, even human toxicity. Sometimes you have a lot of hydrogen fluoride that gets emitted and so on. So okay, I don't want to go too technical into it. Again, this would be the subject of a different presentation, but I hope I gave you a couple of variables that we need to consider when we look into these threads. Okay. Do you want to take another question, or should I move?
Ryan, would you like to ask your question now or after Ioana's presentation?
I think after the presentation.
Yes, perfect. There's many other questions in the chat, so we'll just listen to the presentation.
I'll let you keep track of those then.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll let you keep track of those, and let me see. Okay, I have my screen here. Let me see if you see my screen now. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah, okay, good. So space, new technologies, and sustainability. And we already had a great start in this direction. But I want to take you a little bit back in time about the historical evolution of, let's call it our relationship to space. the very first image, for a long time, right? I mean, you look at Homo sapiens and so on. We looked at space, and we kind of, thought that gods were living in there, and if there is a thunder, then we definitely did something here that made the gods angry, right? Okay, so that's centuries ago, but this is a very important image. It's actually taken in 1946 on a missile rocket launched in the US from White Sands. And it really is the very first imagery that we collected of our own planet from space. Okay, so probably you've all known about, about Sputnik in 1957. But actually, 1946, it is my opinion, the year that really marked that the beginning of our relationship with changed relationship with space. So we take Sputnik 1957. Like I said, it's a really how should I say, low resolution for the standards that we have today, right? With TikTok and everything else, a very low resolution image of the Earth horizon, but it really is a beautiful photo. So then, fast forward 1967, the first commercial satellite. Then we jump into the recent era, right? Early 2000s with CubeSats, small sats, etc. Planet Labs was the first company to, are you seeing seeing my screen?
Yes.
Oh, okay, because I thought there was a glitch here. Okay, so Planet Labs was the first company who not only took a CubeSat, well, a couple of U's into space, but they put a camera on it. And then we have SpaceX Starlinks, who's now providing, global connectivity from space. And we will see that in the next decade, there's over 180 companies planning more than 100,000 satellites to be launched into space. This is an amazing evolution, right? But it didn't used to be this way, because originally, and we saw the first images, right, both the V2 rocket and so on were more government military efforts. And the investments in space stem from government budgets. So we were able to grow out in space because, for example, over the past 10 years, space budget amounted almost $200 billion. And they primarily went into areas such as launching satellite operations, then developing the ground segment to enable that communication, deliver those services, and then, deliver services to public. So because the government continued to feed investments into contracts to industry, this value of government investment really has grown in terms of ultimate value delivered back to the public. So we're really talking here about the reason we're here today is decades of government investment, plus, of course, the advancement of a lot of space and terrestrial technologies, miniaturization, automation, AI, machine learning, additive manufacturing, right? And this is what triggers today, this underlies, right? There's all these synergies that underlie this unprecedented diversification and growth of capabilities to access and utilize space. In other words, it's not something funded by the government for the government. It is now opening up to the civil society. So we've been talking, in time about lowering these barriers, and lowering these barriers is having more ability to more options to use what vehicles we choose to go to space with, right? So I'm showing here over the 3 decades, 1990, 2010, 2010, 2015, and 2015, 2020. Initially, we just had government capabilities. And if you were to take a parabolic, a suborbital flight, or an orbital flight, you just had one option in each of these regimes. So now we see today that, you know, there's an explosion and there's so many companies, from not just SpaceX, who's absolutely the leader in this, but Boeing and Sierra Nevada, Cygnus, Bigelow, etc., right? So we see that the businesses' best practices have also infused themselves into space, in the idea that, you know, instead of trying to de-risk something to 100%, you just stop at some point, you build, you fly, you learn, you upgrade, you build, you do this, you bring a little bit of more trial and error into this whole process. We absolutely, like I said, SpaceX, fast-paced execution, the commercial orbital transportation system model was the first example of a very successful public-private partnership where NASA and SpaceX worked together. And because NASA funded SpaceX, SpaceX was really the leader here, the absolute example to drive and continue to drive increasing frequency of accessing space and then continuous dropping in price. So by continuing to incentivize these private investments, you know, it drives the market growth and it lowers the barrier to access space. The other drivers, like I said, is reduce cost. And just to quantify a little bit, it's not just increasing the frequency, but increasing reusability of rockets. Traditionally, you have first stage, second stage, third, you know, there's whatever, you know, the configuration, the architecture is of that launch system. And then, you know, it drops down, who knows how many there are today on the bottom of the ocean, but you never recover them. And here's where, again, SpaceX took the lead and recovered the first stage, and they're working on to recovering the second stage as well. Not only recovering it, right, but being able, this is, you see this really, really fantastic photo of what they call the grasshopper, right? To be able to reuse this multiple times. So not just one time, multiple time, and then also reuse the Dragon capsule that sits on top of it that goes into space and comes back. So we see the price drop, like when the government used to operate this, we don't even know if this was, it was at least 30,000 per pound to orbit. So that's the reference. I don't know where my unit is here, but it's dollars per pound to orbit. And so that's been going down into 5,000, 1,500. And now with Starship, which is, you know, the huge structure that you've seen Elon build in Boca Chica, it's going to be, it's forecasted to go down to $100 per pound to orbit. So what you can do with that, it's really to the realm of the imagination. Increased access, we're talking about frequency from 1 twice a year to now 3 to 6 to almost monthly flights into space. So I think these are really important drivers. So I mentioned here, yeah, there's, oh, would you mind putting that on mute, please? Thank you. So I talked about miniaturization, right? These small satellites, you saw the CubeSats in the beginning, right? Initially, we were talking about big satellites, takes a lot of cost, takes a lot of effort. These small satellites not only are more space efficient, but they're also more like a puzzle. So if you want to fly something that's to you, then you take one of the two of these units, right? You put them on top of each other, and then you fit what you want to fly in space, whether it is a camera or whether it is synthetic aperture radar, you know, you just fit it in there and then you fly it into space. And again, the versatility and the cost for that really has driven a huge industry in terms of two main new market segments. So while in the early 2000s, we're talking about an emerging economy, today, we see two consolidated segments of this economy. Earth observation forecasted to grow to 8 billion by 2027, and space internet. And right now, we actually have over 800 Starlink satellites in space. Not only that, but now we see a lot of startups growing in this field, and startups usually are responsible for innovation, for lean models of business. And so only in 2020, the investment, the private investment in space was over $9 billion. Launches, again, I showed you about, I talked to you about the versatility and the reduced price. SpaceX used to capture 25% of global launches. And now, you know, with the new development, the new geopolitical development, I'm sure that that percentage has increased just over the past couple of weeks. So let's see, in interest of time, I'll actually skip this, but I will tell you that the capacity of providing data providing the supply from space in terms of global satellite capacity is forecasted by 2026 to exceed 18,000 gigabytes per second. So this is this is not considering the geo satellites, just low Earth orbit and, you know, some medium Earth orbit constellations. So besides this, I mentioned this Earth observation, right? The way of putting a camera into space. I'll go back to what I started, right, with the first images of space. So particularly during the pandemic, the Earth observation satellites, right, the collection of imagery from space was very powerful, because for a moment in time, human activity slowed down, whether it is in airports, whether it is at the beaches, whether it is just traffic in LA, which is, you know, a reference in its horrendousness, but also, you know, just people traveling. And we've been able to characterize by looking at it from space, right, collecting images from space, this decrease in human activity before and after. And talking about sustainability, right? When you keep on going with the status quo, it's really hard to quantify what is the impact of human activity. But now we do have a reference to say, okay, when we don't act at our max, this is what's happening. So let's talk about pollution levels. Pollution levels dropped significantly. And here's, you know, images in India only within a couple of months apart, you know, before and after the pandemic or the shutdown happened. Same in Italy, especially around heavy populated areas. China, you know, it's not just the CO2 levels, right, but also the nitrogen, the NO2 emissions. So it is very clear that our home planet was able to breathe and come back to life once again. In fact, there are statements from communities living at the bottom of the Himalayas saying, wow, we got to see the tops of the Himalaya again, which apparently they used to be for the past couple of years or decades, you know, covered in smog and fog. And unfortunately, we also were able to capture war in terms of not only what's going on today, but also in the past. You know, to use this imagery to characterize past war crime or assess and quantify past war crimes. So here's some images. Sorry, let me go back. In terms of this is in blue around the Blue Nile, assessment of the international razing of civilian structures. You know, the Aleppo, the assessment of the Aleppo tragedy in Syria. And more recently, you know, the current situation with, you know, with the Russian invasion into Ukraine. So this is actually important because while it is very, very unfortunate that this war is happening, this is for the first time that what's happening in that war, it's real time, propagated everywhere. So there's no room to hide and the evidence that is there. And I think that is a very important element, because a lot of the time people are reluctant to act when they don't know what's happening. But this is something that's out there and it's put in front of us. And so let's not only talk about the, you know, the less fortunate things, but let's talk about the moments of inspiration that space gives us. And like I said, not just the fact that now the government is not operating government flights to the International Space Station or in space. It literally is, SpaceX is a commercial company, and is providing services to the government, not just to take cargo to the International Space Station, but in the middle of the pandemic, they were able to birth the Dragon capsule to the International Space Station, and we had the first commercial human flights to the International Space Station, which is a huge, step forward. I don't know if you know these little details. They always carry, like a little animal. This time, this little dragon was fortunate, and this little dragon, when you get into space and into microgravity, it starts floating around. So it is, a very high-tech sensor to tell you, hey, you're in space, you're floating. And these moments of inspirations also are starting to build a different understanding and relationship between ourselves and our home planet. So we have the knowledge that we live on a planet in our solar system. And now I think we're in the process of taking that knowledge, filtering it through our human understanding and human emotions, and turning that into an understanding that this is not just a planet, it's a home planet, and it is a very unique place amongst the stars. And we come to the understanding that similarly to the way humans, when humans go to space, right? Astronauts, when they do a walk outside of the International Space Station, they need protection in order to survive, right? You need to have, in all that astronaut costume, you need to have the air, you need to have the thermal protection to ensure that, you're not freezing, right? It gives you a comfortable temperature level. You also need, of course, food. You need to be protected against radiation. You need to be protected about sudden changes in pressure. And you also need to have a way to remove waste, as well as, of course, deal with gravity. Well, it's very similar. There's a very similar picture here with, our planet home. So planet Earth also has the same needs to survive in space. And it's this unique environment that created for itself and for us, from clean water, right? It's a system that's been developed and refined over billions of years to give us for free this environment to help us survive in space without all needing to wear an astronaut costume, right? We talk here about Earth ecosystem services, right? What nature provides us for free. And this is the result of a United Nations Millennium Assessment that preceded the Sustainable Development Goals. So this was a massive assessment, global assessment, where literally thousands of scientists around the globe came to the understanding. So they looked at all these Earth ecosystem services, from provisioning to cultural and societal, and they did an assessment, and they literally estimated that 90% of these ecosystem services are under severe degradation. And that's what underlies the Sustainable Development Goal, which is the action to go fix them. So there is a clear symbiosis that we came here to build, and to understand that humans and planet can only live if both live. We can live only if the planet lives and survives, and we absolutely need to take care and cherish it. So we're now moving from that knowledge to the understanding, to building a connection with our own planet, between human and home. And this is what people call the overview effect. And you asked, why space tourism? I think space tourism, for some, it's more the fun, it's yet another level in the roller coaster and so on. But I think the more the more civil society flies into space and experiences this view of not looking from here to above, but looking from there back to our planet home, I think the more we're gonna develop, an empathic understanding of the fact that we're absolutely fundamentally connected with our home planet. So let's talk a little bit about the ideology behind this, right? So we're right now in the middle of a crisis, right? Not just the war crisis, but like the Millennium Assessment of, the fact that these systems are under degradation. The result of that is, so we see deforestation, right? We see climate change. We see a lot of waste. We don't know how to handle all the waste. We see a lot of pollution. We see a lot of CO2 emission. We're dependent on fossil fuel, and we know what that meant. And the fact that all these systems are under duress, it also reflects in terms of what we see today of democracy being under menace and retreat. And the underlying problem here is we want to continue the economic growth and the distribution of wealth around the globe, because if you have gradients of wealth around the globe, those maintain conflicts. So we really need to provide more balance across the globe and true respect and action towards human rights, literally no matter where you're from on this planet. At the same time, and of course, economic growth puts a lot of stress on the resources. And if we want to continue along the path of economic growth, we need to continue to manufacture and have industries and have profits and so on, right? And of course, then, people say, well, how about the sustainable future? If we go for a sustainable future, then, the environment requires to stop the economic growth, right? Or the mechanism, or some of the mechanisms underlying economic growth. And how about if that results in a slowdown, what's going to happen? So I think right now, in terms of where our top leaders are, we're really in an ideological lock between economic growth and sustainable future. The way I see it, though, is that that's only true if we adopt this, or if we stay in this thinking of scarce and limited resources. And if we think of Earth as a closed system. And here's where the beauty of the space offer comes into play, because actually our planet is not a closed system. It is part of a bigger system. And we do have access from the surface of the planet into space. And space resources are pretty much unlimited. I mean, I don't know any other physical definition of unlimited unless we go to space. And so this is an opportunity to drive to an ideological unlock between economic growth and sustainable future, where we can do both, be sustainable, redistribute wealth, conserve natural resources, help rebalance the fundamental ecosystems that keep us human alive. And the sustainable development goals, and like I showed you in the beginning, the work of UNOSA, the sustainable development goals connected with space are fundamental in terms of leading us to an abundance and unlimited driven thinking. So let's talk a little bit about what we've seen to date. This economy, very true, has created, unfortunately, a lot of orbital debris. So now, question is, yes, we humans are very wasteful, and it seems that in the first step, we've taken this wasteful attitude into space. Was it negligent? I think it was. Was it deliberately negligent? I don't think so. But the community, and there's so many investments in this area. The community has come around, and up to the level of the United Nations, there's sustainability for space it's considered and treated very, very seriously today. There are so many companies working around the value chain, not only to detect these debris, but to analyze their composition. And then, you know, of course, the government investment continue to support this to see how can we use now this orbital debris as a feedstock for manufacturing in space. First, you know, maybe components that we can assemble instead of assembling and manufacturing satellites at the surface of the Earth, taking them to space to operate. Maybe we can just take the minimum necessary things from here and then leverage on this orbital debris as, you know, a new resource from space. We put it there, so now we better find a good solution to leverage on it instead of now deburning it into the atmosphere. And so again, there's many companies that are working along those lines. So here's where I talked to you a little bit before. The space economy, right, is several trillions, right? If we open up the bounds of a closed economics, you know, at the surface of the Earth, and we build, you know, first this infrastructure in low Earth orbit, and then from here we continue to expand into space. Now we can tap into resources either from meteorites or from the surface of the moon. So then, you know, this whole manufacturing, instead of taking and mining raw materials from the surface of the Earth, we can now use space raw materials to continue to feed into it. Is this going to happen tomorrow? No, absolutely not. But is this feasible plan to work around it? Do we have the technologies? Do we have the ability to turn what looks science fiction into reality? Absolutely. I mean, we've built the International Space Station in 150 years after there was a piece written in the Atlantic saying, oh, you know, it was quoted as a science fiction piece. So we know how to turn science fiction into reality. We're not breaking any physics here. So I already spoken to you about, you know, the pollution, just one example in terms of manufacturing, you know, wafers, right? And this is an integrated circuit on a 30 centimeter wafer. I think we're now down to 10 or so. So of course, you know, that amount of water has gone up. And so we always talk, you know, when we do these studies about the trends and threats and opportunities, right? So I spoke to you about solar power, and there are actually huge investments. Caltech actually has a center for what they call space solar power. We have companies, so that means harvesting solar power directly from space before it's being attenuated, because it goes through the atmosphere and capturing it at the surface of the planet. And I actually have a concern here that we're now so focused on building these huge fields of solar farms at the surface of the Earth with the expense of deforesting, but not having seriously considered a good balance between harvesting the energy from space and then beaming it down to Earth. So I'm really hoping that, you know, we're gonna find that right balance point before we go and we turn now renewable energy into the next fossil fuel drama. So I think that's really important to bring up. In terms of manufacturing, we do see today companies, of course, advanced additive manufacturing is, or 3D printing that we call it. It's not true 3D printing, because the only 3D printing part of it is the design phase. The printing itself phase, it's a layer by layer, so it's a gravity assist process. You wouldn't do that if you were to define this process in space. You would really, space and the lack of gravity, the lack of a preferential direction really offers the opportunity to do 3D printing, and that could be transformative the same way additive manufacturing was transformative across industries, the terrestrial industries. So we have companies such as Made in Space, which is read by today, or TechShot, who have taken this kind of additive manufacturing machineries into space, either to print materials or to print tissues. And TechShot, in fact, they printed a neonatal heart. You can check that in the news. So this is really a massive and important shift in terms of thinking about the true sustainable manufacturing. And I know that you're wondering, well, why manufacturing? Actually, I think manufacturing is the third or the fourth largest contributor to current greenhouse gas emission and an important cause for climate change. So let me talk a little bit maybe about the microgravity environment, right? These changes that we see across materials and biological systems. And it really is very simple put, right? We always look at materials in terms of, okay, how they change when we change temperature, pressure, and that's what we call a phase diagram, right? And those of you who are old enough remember the fantastic shift in industry when the industry went to ultra low temperatures and ultra low temperature processing. So that was just discovering another point on the phase diagram. So what we're doing now is we're adding another axis here to this phase diagram with the gravity dependency. And we have a lot of information about 1G. And we started through decades of microgravity research and development on Skylab and ISS and all these stations in space. We started to build a new set of understanding, from protein crystal growth with larger crystals to immunology responses driven by the T cells in your body, to literally survivability in space, right? The genetic tracing of the fact that, when you're exposed to an unusual stressor, which is the space environment, there's all genes that have been turned off and they turn on in order to ensure that survival. And then you can talk about, plants research. I'll skip this, but, continuing on that timeline that I started on, right? We're now moving from data from space, which is the commodity that we're selling today, right? Images, satellite constellations, right? Internet from space and so on, into atoms from space, right? So the commodity now is making materials, making the next generation of fiber optics or of semiconductors into space and bringing those products back to Earth and making that shift towards in-space manufacturing. So, like I said, we have the ability to bring science fiction to reality. But let's not forget that the core here is that human-home relationship that we need to build on. And we no matter what technologies we build, we should not forget that fundamentally we're human, right? And especially in this context, right? Mitchell, when he went on the moon, and look back at Earth, he said, you really want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck, drag him 250,000 miles out and say, look at that. So what we need in order to bring that science fiction to reality is peace. And that's what we should all focus on. So thank you so much for your attention. I'll take questions.
Well, thank you, Ioana. That was fascinating and so thorough. And I think everybody needs a second to take all in. And I love the message at the end. All this, we need, global international peace, in order to continue all the hard work that's been put into this. And we need kind of exactly, I think we all need to go, and look at the planet, take a few steps back and look at the planet. So we have a lot of questions. Marius, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. So I was just listening to what you said about the sustainable development goals and sustainable development and planning for the future in order to avoid creating problems. So I asked this in the chat, but I was just wondering if you could address the potential human consequences of moving manufacturing to space due to the employment of people in these manufacturing jobs who are, running these systems. Now, you could say that automation might already be doing that, but I was just wondering if you could address the potential human consequences of removing human-centered manufacturing and taking it to the other planet, because the people who are working in these factories, I assume, aren't going to be all migrating out to space to work in these factories, right?
Yeah. So
Thank you.
look, I am not an expert in these kind of studies, but I'm a scientist and I apply the scientific method across. So I've been thinking about it, right? What it is with us human, I mean, first of all, during the pandemic, we somehow created this correct connection between quality of life and having a job, no matter how terrible that job is. And so, of course, politicians, they go because that's what they count for. Their success is we brought jobs with work. How about we bring quality and quality of life? And I think if you go back to quality of life, then you stop reassessing your own fear towards and its contribution in your own relationship with respect to what is a job, how important is a job, how is that job, should that job equal my life, right? And I'm not afraid of letting robots do that job. I want to take a book, I want to read Dostoevsky again, right? I don't want to go and fix all the time, things that are mechanical or whatever. I think we need to give a lot. I see a lot of people who are just, they didn't have the opportunity to truly fulfill their potential in this life because they were driven by, you need to get out of school, you need to get a job, and then you're going to be happy. I don't think that very simple argument works. I think we need to reassess that, and we need to reassess that at the same time of reassessing, this shifting manufacturing into space. I mean, I actually want to see less concrete buildings. I don't want to see these huge factories with that occupy terrain, right? And I want to see more parks. I want to see more plants. I actually would hope that I would have more time for gardening. And if you think of the free flyers architectures, right? So terrestrially, when you build a factory, you're limited by a 2D environment. But if you go to space, your form factor will shrink because now you don't have a preferential axis. So I think overall, it will be more sustainable. Should we look into the negatives? Absolutely. I mean, that's why we have system engineerings in place to go and look at all the things, all the assumptions, even the unknown unknowns, and use the orbital debris problem as, okay, what will potential negative drivers be if we move manufacturing in space? Absolutely. But I think reinventing the workplace and giving back humans the respect in the workplace, it's an absolutely important field. And I'm not that much of a believer of AI and workplace, but that has its place in it. I think we as human have the tendency to jump to extreme very, very easily. We pick something, we think, oh my gosh, this is really, really good. And we need to go back into training our moderation in terms of how do we think, how do we design solutions, how do we design roadmaps. I hope that gave you a little bit of an answer.
Yes, thank you. It's very insightful.
Thank you, Ioana. Ryan, I think you had a question before Ioana started the presentation, and there's a lot of questions in the chat, Ioana, too, if you want to take a look and kind of sift through them.
Sure.
I'll defer just because there's so many great questions from students. So
okay.
properties of materials on planets and asteroid. Okay. Could quantum technology or computers be applied in space? There's been cold atom lab experiment on the International Space Station. You may want to check that. It was more designed to explore at the fundamental level the various physics theories that we have in terms of quantum physics and potentially the connection between quantum physics and gravity, which is something that we haven't merged into a holistic physics model. But I think that's absolutely the knowledge from that can connect with quantum computing. I want to say that there's actually many companies today who realize the power of moving these supercomputing centers into space. In fact, they're absolutely energy intensive. 40%, 30 to 40% of operating a supercomputer has to do with cooling and energy resources. You wouldn't need that in space. And I think there's a lot. When I was at NASA, we were working on this project, which is now called HP Spaceborne Computer. It has the origin at that time into doing a tech demo and then see how can we actually do computation in space. Of course, I mentioned radiation in space. Radiation can trigger false events. That's, there's several areas that are being investigated. But, as we move all this data collection into space, from images to, other analytics, it would absolutely make sense to do the analytics there and then only download the results of that analysis terrestrially. So I think there's many trends there that worth following.
And there's Hudson that has asked this question a couple of times, so I think you would really love an answer. You see the one.
Yeah. What would happen if one satellite crashes into another and creates space debris, which then takes out more satellites? How will this affect the economy and the safety of going into space? Very good question, and I think I mentioned that before. So we did have a couple of these events happening. There's not many, but I think a lot of these new satellites that are being deployed in space, and I'm really using the word satellite here in a very generic term, which means if it's an Earth observation platform, it's still a satellite, right? So a lot of them actually do have this camera detection. You're required to do an analysis, a de-risk analysis on when you're in space, which orbit you're going to be on. And of course, you're also interested in protecting it becomes an asset protection in space. You're interested in, am I going to operate in an area, in an environment where I have a lot of these little pieces? So, that's why what I said before, there's many companies that are focusing on mapping. It starts with mapping. And the most challenging part in mapping is the really, really tiny ones, the sub-millimeter pieces that are literally the sub-millimeter ones. There was a study at Stanford. When they hit your satellite, they turn into plasma, and the plasma fries your electronics, right? It's like a bullet that disintegrates. It could be a catastrophic event. So far, a lot of these things have been prevented, again, because there's quite strict criteria required to be submitted, in terms of where do you operate, when do you operate, how do you operate, at what proximity you are, do you have the technology on board either side to do maneuvers. In fact, on orbit maneuvering and servicing is an emerging area of this new space market. So yeah, it is a safety problem, but I think it's being seriously addressed today. And we're going to learn a lot of things out of this so that we can continue to grow this economy in a more responsible and safe way. At least that's my perspective. Okay. Cybersecurity. I heard that the cybersecurity courses or a career in that domain would be beneficial in space to protect the data safety. Yeah, so, I'm trying to find it. Okay, thank you for a very interesting. I was interested to hear about this subject. One of my kids is in grade 9 and interested in a career in robotics engineering and fascinated by space. I'm trying to find pathways for him to succeed in becoming a scientist in your career. What today? Okay, I hope that we can pick your brain with a few tips. Sure, absolutely. Okay, cybersecurity. Yes, it's very interesting, but you know, the way I think of cybersecurity today is when you download data from space, you now have access to such a wide spectrum of wavelengths. I mean, if you look at the entire electromagnetic spectrum, there's enough wavelengths there. And so the more you broaden that, and you broaden the technology that allow you to use the different wavelengths, I'm not saying there aren't challenges, okay? I'm just giving you a big just overview here. But the more you look into that, you realize that you're going to be able to use a specific wavelength or a combination of wavelength. And so I think that is a really neat solution for cybersecurity threats. Not that there aren't any, and I'm by no means a cybersecurity expert. That's one area where I don't actually like it that much. I'm sorry to have to say, but it doesn't mean it's not beautiful. Maybe for other people. I'm passionate about in-space manufacturing, as you could see. So, yeah. Okay. Are there any questions that you want to take? Or I mean, I see that we're coming close to.
Yes, there's also Krista, who is in my class, you know, the heritage language class. So thank you, Krista, for coming. She wants to know what are some downsides of manufacturing in space that you wouldn't encounter regularly.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern right now is, and was it Bryson who brought that up? That we don't understand enough how much, if we increase traffic up and down, because now with the data we only increase traffic up, right? But with the manufactured products from space will increase traffic down, right? And two of the biggest concern that comes to mind are, of course, the pollution, because now you're coming back and, you know, if you scale, I mean, if you occasionally come back and re-enter with the current technology, I don't think it's a problem. But if you're now gonna do that, you know, 100 times a day, different locations around the globe, it becomes a problem. But even bigger of a threat, and that's actually been a long-standing problem in re-entry systems, is you could absolutely visualize one of these re-entry systems being redirected, maybe through a cybersecurity attack, and dropped on a populated area and used as a weapon. So that's probably a really big concern for me. And again, I haven't really studied that part enough, but I would absolutely say that that's an important threat to look into and address. I mean, in fact, that's why a lot of the Dragon capsules, they land on sea. There's very rare events that we allow landing on ground, and even if that's happened, it's usually very small re-entry systems, and it's in deserted areas, and you really have to have a thorough analysis, because the biggest challenge is control at the entry point of the interface, right, with the atmosphere, and then how do you continue to control that corridor up to its landing. And usually, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, that's a 50-mile radius. So that's pretty impressive. I mean, that's a pretty low resolution, I would say. So having precision return and you know, de-risking that part is very important. And I really don't know who's working on that today.
Okay. And yeah, I don't know if I don't think you addressed that question about career paths. You know, what can a high schooler, you know, interested in pursuing a career in space, should do at this, in ninth grade, let's say, and kind of prepare for a career in space.
Yeah, so you see, I did not go to school in the US except, after I finished my PhD. So, but I do have, 2 goals, and I do work, having lived here for a long time, and I had a lot of students throughout the years. It's pretty impressive how many opportunities there are to work in an organization related to space, especially at the undergrad level. You'll see a lot of space clubs and so on. It's pretty impressive that, once you're an undergrad, you can send one of these, especially now with the CubeSat, you send a CubeSat in space, you run an experiment. Most universities have those labs, and it's really, really amazing. Having said that, there's absolutely nothing impeding you, if you have that passion, to see how can you create such a lab at the high school level. You just need to get probably, some PTA votes and a passionate professor to help you build that club and build that lab. And maybe you can build that lab to operate across several high schools. But I think that's absolutely an opportunity. And this is what I love about the United States, that, in terms of, it's not like there aren't challenges, right? But I think there's always support that you can find with this idea. So follow your passion. If I'm allowed here a parenthesis, I never thought I was going to work in space. I wanted to be a flight attendant when I was in high school, because it was very rare to be able to fly at that time. And I really thought it was wonderful to be on an airplane and to be able to go see the world. So I'm glad I didn't end up a flight attendant. And I'm also glad I didn't end up with a typical academic career. But I think it really boils down to following your passion and not letting yourself fall prisoner to that paradigm of job equals happiness. I think our purpose in life is to fulfill our potential. But in order to do that, you need to make sometimes some dire decisions, and just keep that in mind.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ioana. Thank you, everyone. I'm sure you can, we dropped the link in the chat about Ioana. I think we did.
Yeah. Connect with me.
Right?
I don't promise I will respond, but maybe we can coordinate with Ottilia and Ryan, and I'm happy to come back and, develop. There's one thing that it's missing is a curriculum about space. So we have aerospace departments, but we don't have a curriculum about space and microgravity and, these kind of things. So, space and humanities. I think these are important curriculums that we should try to build, and this global classroom would be a great maybe initial place to put together such curriculums and experiment with them.
Okay, so I did drop my email in the chat. If you would have questions for Ioana, I will curate them and, kind of put you in contact with her. Thank you so much for attending today. Ryan, would you like to say a few closing remarks as well?
Sure, thank you so much. Ioana, this was just an amazing presentation. I feel like I learned so much in the last hour and a half, and there's so much that I can bring into the classroom, but there's so much just on a personal level that I'm thinking about. So thank you so much for bringing this to us this morning and this afternoon. And I hope we have an opportunity, at some point to do a follow-up program. I want to thank Ottilia as well for collaborating on this program with the World Affairs Council. And I also want to thank all of the participants, because this is one of the most engaging programs we've had in terms of people just asking so many wonderful questions. So thanks to everyone for taking time out of your Saturday to join us. So we look forward to a future program.
Thank you too. It was a real pleasure to be here, and thank you everybody for your openness and for the dialogue here. And let's do this again.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.